May we start? In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the Lord be with you. Let us pray. God and Father of us all, in Jesus, your Son and our Savior, you have made us your sons and daughters in the family of the Church. May your grace and love help our families in every part of the world be united to one another in fidelity to the gospel. May the example of the Holy Family, with the aid of your Holy Spirit, guide all families, especially those most troubled, to be homes of communion and prayer, and to always seek your truth and live in your love, through Christ our Lord. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
This is a family. You are seeing 6 faces there.
1,
That is one face.
2,
Another
3, 4, 5, 6.
They are united. You can see all of them.
And they're intertwined. So you have the mother and the father, but every child is connected to them. They all hold a piece of the mother and father. They all stem from the mother and father. There's no part of me that would be without my mother, and there's no part of me that would be without my father, because it takes the two of them to make me. So all of the children connect to the parents.
The Chinese understanding of the family is like a garden. Husband and wife are cultivating this garden of love. In due time, they will bear fruits. The boys are fruits, and daughters are flowers. The garden is not isolated from other gardens. It's a big garden that's connected to older generation and then passed on to younger generation. In the whole history of this time, you play your own mission in this great work, and you bring about something that's greater than yourself.
Decir humanidad es decir hombre y mujer, porque nos necesitamos mutuamente como humanidad. Pero en términos de relación humana, de existencia, nos necesitamos mutuamente. De tal manera que esta complementariedad sí nace de una sabiduría ancestral, de una sabiduría que podríamos llamar en el lenguaje de hoy ecológica. El hombre y la mujer, cuando asumen el compromiso del matrimonio, se hacen más capaces de amar, más capaces de darse a sí mismos. Porque ya no solo es un entretenimiento, sino la vida de los dos es una tarea humana. Una tarea hermosa porque en ella se realiza lo más humano. Es decir, el Papa Juan Pablo II en particular, me gusta esa frase que utiliza: amar es hacerse cargo de la vida de otro. Y justamente esto es lo que hacen los dos, hombre y mujer, cuando se casan, pero lo hacen aún más cuando acogen a los hijos que vienen como fruto de esta relación humana, interpersonal, íntima. La capacidad de acoger y hacerse cargo del destino de otros.
When you stand back, you'll be able to see that this is another head turned to the side. This is another person completely. And it's not until later on that you realize another child will join you. Maybe it's 5, 6 years down the line, a child will join you. So the invisible child that is about to come has all of these senior siblings specifically in place that are going to nurture that child. They were there at a certain time without realizing they were going to have anybody following them, but they were able to get all of the greatness that they were deserving ready in place for the next child to come.
Good, they clapped for the films.
What was that?
I said they clapped for the films.
Good afternoon. Professor Helen Alvaré is a professor of law at George Mason University in Virginia. Her teaching and scholarship address matters concerning the family and the intersection of law and religion. She speaks at academic gatherings around the world and through print media and television. Professor Alvaré has represented all of the U.S. Catholic bishops and the Holy See before the world press and in appearances before the United States Congress and the United Nations. She is a consultor to the Pontifical Council for the Laity and the founder of Women Speak for Themselves. She is married and has 3 children. Professor Alvaré is a bright light, offering insightful commentary on the intersection of faith and contemporary culture in a way that allows the beauty and the truth of the gospel of life to shine forth. And she does this not only through her words, but even more eloquently through the witness of her life as a wife and a mother.
Good afternoon. It is a delight to be with you, and I am humbled too to be in this position when it is faith that has brought you here, and you showing me already a powerful understanding of and witness to the gift from God that is family life. Please take a moment to appreciate the gift that you already are to others who see you. We're here together today to think about things that are eagerly awaited, that are hoped for, but also, at the same time, are feared: fertility and the future. Pope Francis speaks of this so often. The creative people all over the world who make their living trying to discern what it is that we're dreaming about, what it is we want, and then reflect that back to us. Advertisers, filmmakers, songwriters, they know that it's irresistible for human beings to hear stories of romance leading to marriage and then children, stories of families reuniting after they've broken apart, stories of hearts softened and enlarged by encounters with children or the disabled or the elderly, where love triumphs over troubles and practical difficulties are overcome. Their movies, their songs, their advertisements, they show us possibilities for our own lives, our lives as we want them to be, as we hope and pray they will be, lives where room is always made for the other, where we don't count the cost, where fears about the future are completely overcome, hearts are melted, and cruelty is transformed and forgiven. In these depictions, in songs, in films, in advertisements, families accept one another and other families, young and old, rich and poor, sick and well. And then the movie or the song or the ad comes to its climactic ending, and there's joy and peace and love. Ladies and gentlemen, adults and children, these purveyors of dreams are not wrong. They have understood our deepest desires, even as they produce a lot of other awful material that gets human beings completely wrong. But our God dearly wants us to generously accept one another in our families and then beyond. Remember, this is the God who, in the person of Jesus Christ, summarized his mission as having come that we might have life and have it abundantly. The title of today's presentation has the word fertility in it. Of course, I'll be speaking about children, but I'll also be speaking about the entire path of Christian life and its essential structure and relationship. We are built for relationship. To be open to the other person, to give to the other person, as Pope Benedict famously put it in his encyclical Deus Caritas Est, to give to the other person that look of love which they crave. And as Pope Francis so often exhorts us, to live our lives as sources of mercy. We are made to open ourselves to God first, and then every single other neighbor who, like the injured traveler in the Good Samaritan story, we happen to find strewn across our particular path as we live our life in the world. As the author of the book called Loneliness reminds us, interestingly, one of those authors was the co-founder of a very widely used dating site, right? He writes a book called Loneliness. He says, there's a really good reason why solitary confinement is universally considered the punishment nearest to death itself. Because we are simply built to be with one another. Of course, we long to love and be loved, to know others and be known deeply, to care for others and to give care. That's kind of a secret, that we want to be needed, right? Everybody thinks nobody wants to take care of anyone else, and then everyone else is in their corner saying how badly they wish they were needed. Despite these primal, these deep, these God-given facts about our human selves today, in a new and really pernicious way, we're regularly encouraged, or worse, to close ourselves off to fertility, to the needy other, and even live that way as our life in general. Ironically, this is especially urged where family is concerned. We're told not to marry, until we've lived our life, not to be overrun with the needs of children or elderly or disabled family members. How ironic. The family, the exact group of other human beings in the world that God chooses for us to provide for each and every one of us, each of every one of the individual human beings in human history, an exactly tailored education in how to love God and one another. Which one of us has not said to the child or family member who feels unlike the others, but don't you understand? God gave you to me. It was that particular. It was that exact. With his very hand, he placed you in my care and in my love and me for you. Because it is that specific. But our God has not left us alone, not even for a second, even in the disputed arena of the family. He is there in the restlessness we feel when we've settled for less than the abundant life in the family. He's there in the consolation we receive when we order our priorities rightly and we put people before things. He's there in the facts on the ground, in human experience, in science, which confirms over and over and over again that the way of happiness, ironically, the way of freedom, is the way of interdependent love, and that the starting block on the way of love is the family. I want to reflect on this theme of the family and fertility today by first looking at the evidence about God's plan for human beings to welcome one another, with special attention to the gift of children. Then I want to look at families as we actually experience it. I've been listening to a number of terrific talks here at this meeting, and people are very real about how family life is actually experienced. And we're not going to convert ourselves or touch the other unless we understand it as it's really lived. Then I want to consider the genuinely profound, utterly basic disputes and overwhelming challenges sometimes to the Christian norm of welcoming first the child, then the family, then the extended family, and then all others, before offering a few concluding words. First, turning to the signs that we have about God's plan for human beings to welcome one another, with special attention to children. The first thing that has to strike us, really between the eyes, if you even think about it for 5 seconds, is that God, in God's self, is not alone. He is three persons in a constant, never-ending relationship of love. We human beings, made in God's image, are also made for relationship and also built to give and receive love. We are male and female who together bring this third life into being. When people say that human beings are in God's image, often they are referring primarily to our capacity for free will and rationality. But the thing that is most often left out in the statement, we are in God's image, is that like God, we are in relation, even as ourself, as the one alone in a room, we are still in relation. This strikes us with particular force when we consider that God could have done otherwise. He could have made every member of the human race one sex. No problem, he could have done that. He could have fashioned each one of us from scratch, with no cooperation required at all from a set of parents. He could have done that. He could have decided that we would be built where other things on earth are built. Workshops, construction sites, negotiating tables, laboratories. He could have done it anyway, bringing new human life into being. But he did none of these. None of these, God determined, was sufficient to the nature or the greatness or the dignity or the image of God of the human person. So instead, God put the gift of making and caring for new life in the hands of the man and the woman, beginning with what Genesis so gorgeously calls the one flesh union, a union signifying in the body what is also meant to be true in the manner of their entire life. Two united, cooperating to care for others, who is in every way this first other, this child, a part of each of them and a natural link to the future. God could also have fashioned things so that only brief cooperation between the man and the woman was needed to nurture life. And as anyone who has been a parent for 5 minutes, in that first moment when you realize the years unrolling before you knows, he didn't fashion nurturing human beings as a matter of quick cooperation. He designed it so that children would need their parents' concerted cooperation for a very long time and would feel the loss keenly at any age if the family broke apart or any one of them were lost. Consider, by contrast, how other living beings are created without the presence of love at their beginning, or replicated by one parent progenitor, or often abandoned shortly after birth, but not human beings. As to us, God chose specifically differently, and it means something. God also fitted us with ingenious biological, neurological, and other mechanisms which attract us toward family building, family loyalty, and care for kin. There's the mysterious and amazing and continually unfolding function of human hormones, bringing men and women together, playing a role in bonding them, moving parents to care for their offspring, and rewarding and consoling parents when they do. There's the incredibly imaginative genetic link. I mean, we take it for granted, but it had to be invented by someone. This notion, right? That parent would be connected to child and grandchild and cousin and so forth. This link is part of this unseen, we don't even think about, this natural home, this nest, in which the child finds his or her unique identity, gains stability, and feels family pride. Just the conversation one has about whose curly hair the child inherited, or why she or he can roll their tongue, or the shape of their ears and how their grandfather suffered through the same set of overlarge ears. These parts of conversation are a sign of God's wit, right? This genetic link that enables a child to be linked to mother and father and grandmother and grandfather and aunt and uncle. I'm part of a family here in Philadelphia. I have over 100 family members here in Philadelphia, and we have a certain look about us, so that sometimes people will see someone who is my cousin in a train and greet them as me. I love that, right? It's the family. And this unique and creative thing of the genetic link is God's witty way, among others, of binding us. That the family is of God, an aspect of his divine plan, is also surely indicated by Jesus' own life on earth, which you've heard so many times. His coming to us through the pregnancy and birth of a human mother. His being reared in a family home with a human mother and father. Jesus often referring to our status as children of a loving Father. And his forceful affirmation of the divine intention for the permanent, faithful, fruitful union of the man and the woman. Consider this powerful witness of our nature and of God's intentions when we reflect in a few minutes upon the loud claims that there is nothing at all special, nothing of any great moment, nothing unique about the man and the woman coming together to bring new life in the world. Nothing we cannot replace with technology or sheer will or human law. The Humanum film that you saw just before I entered here is part of a larger project to address this basic lack of attention to these fundamental realities of human ecology. Pope Francis opened up a marvelous conference last fall, the Humanum Conference. We have the book collecting the talks here today in this hall and I think also in the exhibit hall, where the church, along with so many other religions across the planet, explored the natural and supernatural reality of the absolutely obvious uniqueness and moment of the fact that there is man and woman, not one sex, and that it is man and woman together who bring the child into the world. At the moment, however, I want to turn my attention to the second point about the family as we actually experience it in our day-to-day lives, in light of this call to welcome new life in one another. Let's be frank. When you live elbow to elbow with each other, with other people in your house, day and night, through good times and bad, there are endless, or as I like to say, relentless opportunities to learn to love, and also to respect and admire one another. But side by side with these, at the very same moment, are opportunities to get impatient, to become angry or disgusted. Pope Francis refers to this as, the moment where the plates start flying, right? In this sense, one might say that nothing prepares you for the world quite like living this close with your closest relatives. Famous Catholic writer and philosopher G.K. Chesterton wrote in one of his Father Brown mystery novels, "You matter, I matter. It is the hardest thing in theology to believe." And it is hard, yes. Let's start by thinking about other people's children, okay? Now envision them crying near to you in a plane or a bus or throwing a tantrum in a supermarket. And don't even get us started on the subject of rude neighbors and coworkers. How can we ever come to that Pope Benedict point of giving this every other person the look of love they crave? The answer is pretty simple. It's unlikely that we'll ever start down that road unless we've gained some Good Samaritan practice at home, unless we have listened many times to the same story told by our grandmother, or helped our disabled sister cope with a bully at school, or given money we don't really have to an in-law in need. Unselfishness is a habit. Even sacrificial love is a habit. I remember hearing this for the first time when I was in law school, and I had a roommate break up with her fiancé. They are happily now remarried for over 30 years, but she was so grieved, and I was trying to start down this road of giving things away that were very dear to me. And so I took my favorite gold pin that my mother had given me on my 13th birthday that she had admired, and I hung it on her doorknob. And I turned around to walk away, and then I reached back to grab it because I couldn't, and then she opened the door. and so I was able to engage in sacrificial love despite myself. It's just a habit. My heart was not there, but it comes there after you practice this for a while. If we don't begin the habits of sacrificial love in the family, good luck finding the wherewithal to practice it someday for someone who is unknown to you. In the words of the immortal American comic character Snoopy, I love humanity. It's people I hate. You remember those? Family love gets us to a wider circle. You start with the people who take too long in your one bathroom and who need you to drop off the car for repairs just as the thunderstorm gets started. But you end with strangers in need whose only link with you is their common humanity. This process actually, as I've observed it, and now I'm getting older, so I have a little arc of history to look at, it can proceed pretty organically. I'll never forget the day my husband and I brought our first baby home from the hospital. She's an adult woman here with me today. There she was, limp and beautiful as a pile of rosebuds. That was my first thinking. I had never felt skin like that except when rosebuds started to get softer. She was sleeping in the back seat of the car, in the baby seat. We stopped by a relative's house who leaned in the window and put her hand in to touch her. And someplace deep inside of me came this primal thing, don't touch her. And I thought, oh, that's really weird. I wonder where that came from. But it turns out that's not actually weird at all. That's where it begins. This is a person completely entrusted to you, and no matter whose hand is coming through the window, your first reaction is go away. Then your children grow up, and they struggle to adjust to being responsible for themselves with more and more obligations in the world, and more subject to worldly temptations. And you begin to sympathize a great deal, particularly when they turn teenagers, especially if you are even basically honest about your own teenage years and what was going through this head of yours. If you're in my shoes and you teach a lot of students who are freshly emerged adults, so I'm teaching students in their early 20s, you begin to sympathize with the fact that the world is really asking them to leap tall buildings by 22, 23. They ask you to get into college. What is your passion? What research projects in foreign countries to improve the lives of others do you intend to take up at age 20? Where's your resume? Have you accomplished your dreams yet? You just really sympathize with them. Occasionally, they begin to seem like your own children, and you slip now and again into calling one of your own students, or even a stranger, sweetie or honey, when they come to you with a question. And in case you're wondering, this is a mistake, especially if they're 6'5" and they've just met you. Eventually, if you have asked God day in and day out to work his will with you, you begin to see every child as if they could be your child. It's like a magical transformation. You won't be able to look at the homeless, the sick, the depressed, the fatherless, without remembering how they are someone's child or sibling or mother, and then converting that co-suffering, converting your maternal and paternal selves into action. This organic and divine growth in love and understanding can work in other ways too. As a child, you come to understand how human beings are first receivers of love and then givers. You figure out as a child that you first have to gain some self-possession as a gift from someone before you're capable of practicing self-donation. And you have to see that you can't push your young child too far in that. It's a push and pull. They have to understand that you are empowering them, enabling them first, and then they feel free to give. You also come to understand the struggles of all mothers and fathers, aunts and uncles, grandmothers and grandfathers, simply because the family is a global, interreligious, trans-historical feature of human life in every culture and religion. I have seen the universal quality of the family inspire kinship in a global way. On 2 occasions, I have participated in interfaith dialogue with Muslim women. At the first one, we spoke quite formally. I was the Catholic law professor, and they were the Muslim philosopher or Muslim lawyer. The philosopher and I eventually realized that we had daughters who were exactly the same age. Our conversation very soon turned to shared experiences of motherhood. Before the week was done, we were exchanging gifts for one another's daughters, while also finding formal, positive proposals as the family that we could share as professional colleagues. The other occasion was one of my favorite my favorite laughs. I was in a dialogue with a group of women lawyers from Arab countries. At one point, one of the women's cell phone rings, and it's her husband calling from Saudi Arabia. And every woman here will know exactly why he was calling. He couldn't find the children's school uniforms. Am I right? Okay? And she said, which every woman says, they're exactly where they've been every day for the last 8 years, right? And he did not react to that too well. My husband doesn't like that. And she gets off the phone and she bursts out laughing and she says, my husband is in Saudi Arabia, I'm here in Washington, D.C., and he wants to know where the uniforms are. Every woman at the table had a good laugh. And on that universally shared experience, we built a much better personal, but also legal dialogue, because we knew who each other was as a human being, as a member of the family. We were instantly humanized to one another. We knew what we had in common in our shared humanity. You can observe this in the same way an older father can counsel a younger father, even if they're strangers. A grandmother can counsel her daughter. A daughter caring for her elderly mother meets another woman who's starting to care for her elderly mother and can pass on the wisdom. All have come to know what no book can teach, how you really do find yourself in losing yourself in the love of other people, beginning with family and then moving out into the world. Finally, before offering some concluding remarks, I want to consider today the genuinely profound and sometimes overwhelming current challenges to the Christian norm of welcoming the child, the family, and then the nearest neighbor. Just in case you are tempted to think that even for one moment I am suggesting that family life is all hearts and flowers, I want to assure you that I am not. In my family, I'm known for several things, of course, but one of them is for my saying to my recently deceased and very accomplished mother, my mother who was so gifted at the piano, who graduated first in her class in a local Philadelphia Catholic college. I said to her when I was like 10 years old, which was when feminism was really coming in the late 20th century, wow, you could have been something. Yeah. I said, why are you taking care of us when you could have been something? There were 5 of us. Her mother, my grandmother, Helen, also lived with us her whole life and was taken care of in our home until she died. Yes, I was a child of the 70s and totally an early convert to the gospel of me. I remember being absolutely horrified when it struck me during my late teens that the time was coming in my life when the world thought that I could be beginning to think about being married and having kids. Oh my gosh, I thought, is this life? Is this all there is? Why was I spending all this time getting an education if I was going to turn it around and fork it over to children? Where was the decade of fun I had coming to me? It was only an adult reconversion to the beauty of the way of Jesus Christ. I was totally reconverted by that famous, line in the scriptures, Lord, where would we go? I mean, what else really could compare? I was really able to look around in my 20s at the other isms and make, I hope, I thought a very rational and also faith-filled evaluation at that time. So I was converted to that, but I was also converted to the despair of living for myself. It was awful. To the joy of loving other people. I was also converted by the witness of my family's love for my disabled sister, of my parents' love for one another, of their taking care of their elderly relatives until their death, of my older sister's marriages, my older brother, the way they cared for their children, of the mentor couples in my parish who were so marvelous, the grandparents who loved seeing me come to the parish with the young kids and spoke to me about my children. All of that awakened me in my 20s. On that subject of the gospel of me, however, things have only intensified as a general matter over the last couple decades. We might capture these trends, and you've seen the figures in the newspapers, by observing that fewer people are marrying at all. in many countries, in really every region of the world, with very few exceptions. Many and many are living together instead, making absolutely no promises to one another about the future or about children. In the vast majority of countries, people are having fewer, even tiny numbers of children. Demographers call it lowest low of fertility, and more countries are falling into it. And dramatically higher numbers of children are unlikely to live with both their parents. You've undoubtedly heard about this on and on. What is taking the place of spouses and children in our lives? Many are simply responding to the world's very intense and incessant demands to be mobile, unencumbered, fast-moving, and competitive in order to keep up with the pace of a globally integrated workforce and economies, which basically translated means work out of your living room 24/7 with a mobile device and no coworkers. I mean, that's sort of what we're responding to more and more. Many see the allure of the production of new created things, but not the beauty of the procreation of children. People fear interdependency, responsibility for a new soul in a world that is economically fearsome to them. Globally integrated, and in the sense that when one domino falls, so do many others. For many, life is very tough economically. And public and private leadership do not set policies according to how the family ought to be treated, how to nurture the family. Policies on pay, policies on job security, on work schedules are set according to efficiency, according to individual accomplishment, not according to what is good for the family. Finally, many people are simply choosing more material things and more time to savor them, in lieu of spending money and time on the rearing of children. For women, there's an additional dynamic at work. The persistent, strident set of voices telling women that they have for far too long lost out on all the good stuff of life by devoting themselves disproportionately to children or to disabled or elderly relatives. In the name of equality, in the name of freedom, in the name of justice, these voices recast fertility as a disability, and the government is more and more and more on the side of this proposal. Some of the more prominent, even glamorous international movements asserting women's interest have put this message at the very top of their agenda. It's painful to see. Women's own self-described needs and desires are ignored. Of course women want to and can contribute to the community. Of course women want to and can and do contribute to intellectual, academic, media, entertainment, political life. But they want to do it in a way that allows them to put people first, particularly the people given to them. But today, public and private leaders Thank you. Public and private leaders today are left very free to overlook, ignore, and refuse to accommodate women's own interests and desires about marriage and family life, and to instead embrace contraception and abortion as the sine qua non of women's equality. They just put them on an exactly even plane. Thank you. The prominent modern tendency to equate women's freedom with freedom from children has tragic outcomes. Non-Catholics and Catholics alike can observe them. You do not have to believe in the Catholic Church's teaching about fertility and marriage and family in order to observe what I'm telling you, and it's more widely observed today than ever. There are not only physical and practical consequences of contraception and abortion, the destruction of human life, the harmful health effects on women. It's hard to go by a month in the United States without some magazine or major newspaper printing an expose on the effects of some particular form of contraception on a woman's body. But there are also larger effects on the relationships between men and women, and parents and children. In a culture where sex is artificially cut off from new life, and I'm not talking about every act, I'm talking about where even the idea that sex happens to be the place where all human life and human society is put is simply set aside. In a culture where sex is just another thing to do, it's like a tennis game, okay? The casualties are legion. Sex becomes the price of even a brief relationship with a member of the opposite sex. Nothing special at all. Sadness and even depression, especially among women, grow when seemingly intimate bonds, it seems intimate, but then they find out the next day they're nothing at all. There's no bond there, or at the very least, it was highly temporary. The desire for marriage is weakened, or marriage is timed and planned more with respect to material standards of living. God's gift to women, his entrusting them in a very particular way with pregnancy, with childbirth, is greeted with a yawn, or worse, anger and resentment. Childbearing is foregone. More and more children are born without even the possibility of their parents' stable love and care. Eventually, it's even argued that there can be such a thing as marriage that is explicitly divorced from the notion of children. Because after all, they said, already marriage between opposite-sex couples is explicitly divorced from children and culture. Why should there not be same-sex marriage, is the argument. Children are an extrinsic matter, a second question at best, so far removed from the first question. So, in conclusion, our Catholic faith about the family, about new life, about the meaning of love for the other, is not on its face or as lived some obscure, narrow, separate body of doctrine hidden away in some corner, impossible to decipher or determine. It lives vibrantly in your families, in your church communities. It is present on the faces of the children, of the disabled and elderly and extended family you care for. It is supported daily. I wish you could see the research that comes across my desk in the leading social science or psychological or anthropological or neurobiological journals on a weekly basis. This research, emerging from every corner of the world and in so many disciplines, chronicles the association between a welcoming, stable family life and the possibility in society for more happiness, freedom, peace, and even economic security and human rights for women and children. The opposite view, beginning with denying that there's even a natural link between love and life, thus denying children's rights to be known and to know their mother and father, and denying ultimately that life is for giving away, it's not working out. It's just not. We know that now because we've experimented with it. We really have. We've had a decades and decades long experiment with this. And we can count the cost to a man and to a woman, and especially to the children. And in particular, today, we can count it more and more to the elderly, and in particular to the poor, who in the United States and elsewhere suffer more from a retreat from marriage and family than any other group. They are denied so many other things, and now even this. As Catholics, alongside those of other faiths who understand the place of the family in God's plan and the place of welcoming new life in the family, it's frankly up to us to bring to life what we know about accepting other people into our lives. And this begins with, for most people, accepting children. Not all, but it is the lesson for most. It is up to us to help others overcome their not insubstantial fears of fertility, their fears of the future. It is up to us to show them, as well as to speak with them, about the joys of family life, to adopt an attitude of abundance, a loaves and fishes mentality, and a way of life that is in integrity with that, to let our very person speak about the transformation of every person possible when they learn via the family that giving is receiving, to develop practical habits of living as the man or woman for others, because most people are not going to consult the latest research. That's what I do all day. I don't think it's what most people do all day. Most people are not consuming Catholic literature on the family, but they will look and they will see in our faces and in our lives, or not, the message of Jesus Christ to be fruitful in our families and with every neighbor that God has strewn across each of our paths one different from the other. I want to thank you very much.